Hi, and thank you for joining Kings Mountain National Military Park during the Memorial Day weekend virtual campout. We are excited to host World War II living history interpreter Matt and his dog Maggie as they portray a war dog and handler in the Pacific Theater. Matt is dressed in olive drab fatigues and sits on an olive drab cot with a tent of the same color behind him. His rucksack and helmet rest on the cot. His brown dog Maggie sits beside him on the cot on a leash.
Hey, my name is Matt, and this is my dog Maggie, and we are representing a war dog handler and a war dog as they would have looked in New Guinea in the summer of 1944 as part of the 26th Quartermaster Corps War Dog Platoon. So when we talk about war dogs, a lot of people have an idea of what they think that might be, and often it has something to do with attacking people, which might be the fault of a recent video game where you can get dogs to go attack your enemies. But that's actually not what war dogs did for the most part in World War II. Dogs did a lot of jobs. Some of them are kind of obvious, like guard dogs, that sort of thing. But in New Guinea, in the summer of 1944, dogs had some really specific jobs. And they weren't about ending human lives, they were about saving human lives. And we'll talk about that in a second. But first, I think it's important to talk about how did war dogs end up in the Army in the first place. Because when World War II started, the Army was incredibly small. The US had the 19th largest army in the world. So they didn't have a war dog program. Dogs were used in World War I, but that program had kind of fallen apart and wasn't really, not a lot of effort was put into it between the wars when the Army was dramatically shrunk in size. So when World War II breaks out, the Army decides that they need a war dog program, but they don't have anything. So they turn to a group of civilians, which are just non-military people, and they said, "How can you help us find dogs?" So a lot of places have dogs, like there's dog pounds, there's stray dogs, but if you really want dogs that are healthy, that are used to working with people, that aren't overly anxious or aggressive, the best place to look is probably right where you are right now, in your own home, because that's where you're going to find good dogs. Now, a lot of people, when I ask students at schools, they wouldn't really be that up for giving away their dogs. But something you have to remember that is very different in World War II is that everybody knew somebody who was serving in the military in the United States. Whether it was your dad or a brother, an uncle, a cousin, a neighbor, a friend, something like that, everybody knew somebody. And the Dogs for Defense program, they made the case that if you send your dog overseas to be part of the fight, it might help bring home somebody you love, a person you love. So that was the math people were doing. And also at this point in the war, people were used to giving up stuff that they used every day to give more to the people overseas. And that's called rationing. So people had less meat, less sugar, less nylon, less everything to make sure that the troops fighting overseas had what they needed to win the war. So this is pretty common. But once you get dogs in, what do you do with them? Well, basically, dogs have to go through a boot camp just like humans do. And in the 26th Quartermaster Corps War Dog Platoon, it's a mouthful, men like Bill Garbo, who's a veteran of the platoon who I got to know, he went through basic training, and at the end of it, just like every soldier, he's kind of asked, what do you want to do next? And some people would say the infantry or the engineers or something like that. But Bill was given the chance to work with dogs, and he loved dogs, so he said he was going to do that. So Bill agreed to work with dogs, and he was sent away from the unit he trained with, went over to California, and he was put in this platoon, and there they met a big group of dogs. And from there, they basically had to do the same things that humans did in basic training. They had to learn how to march, they had to learn how to be still, they had to learn to follow commands and work as a team. So they did that together. Now, there are two types of dogs that they were looking for in the 26th. They were looking for scout dogs and messenger dogs. And both dogs do things, or both types of dogs use things that they do better than humans, again, to help save human lives. Now, Maggie over here is my dog, and if you look at Maggie, if you watch her, or if you watch your own dog, you'll notice that their nose, let me see your nose, show them your nose. She doesn't want to cooperate today. But if you notice a dog's nose, they're always sniffing. And the thing that's different about a human nose versus a dog nose is that dog's nose are wet on the inside and the outside, while human noses are just wet on the inside. Please don't check, that's kind of gross, and if you do, wash your hands. Anyways, the fact that they have a wet nose allows them to trap more smells, because everything you smell is a tiny little particle, and their smells are so sensitive. It's kind of like HD smelling. They can smell everything. Like if somebody had a pizza nearby, I would be able to smell that pizza smell. Stay here, Maggie. I'd be able to smell that pizza smell, but Maggie would be able to smell the dough separate from the cheese, separate from the sauce, separate from the pepperoni. They can pick out all those individual smells. The other thing that they have is their ears. Their ears are designed to move, to catch more sounds than we do. Now, as humans, we rely on our sense of sight to understand the world around us. And sight is great, but is limited, like if there's a wall behind you, or if you're in a dense jungle with lots of plants and trees and shrubs, they can't see as much. But if you're a dog, you have a 360-degree sense of the world because smell and sound are your main ways of understanding the world around you. So dogs have a huge advantage, and in the 26th, they were able to take advantage of that to save human lives. See, New Guinea was this island in the Pacific, and fighting had been taking place there for almost a year in the summer of 1944 when Bill Garbo and the rest of the 26th had shown up. They were fighting the Japanese there, and the Japanese were masters of jungle fighting. They were great at camouflage, they were great at building fortifications, and so when American soldiers went looking for Japanese, the first indication that they had that any Japanese were nearby was that they were getting shot at. And they were losing men because they didn't know where the enemy was before the enemy knew where they were. So the idea was that they were going to put scout dogs in the front of a patrol and messenger dogs in the back. So a patrol is any group of soldiers, which could be just a couple up to a couple hundred, that goes out and tries to make contact with the enemy or locates the enemy or something along those lines. So scout dogs. So a scout dog's main piece of equipment is this collar. This collar, when it is on a dog, that dog knows that it's time to work, which means that they can't bark, they have to pay incredible attention to their handler. So scout dogs would be sometimes they work differently with their handlers. Some dogs would work off the leash, which means that they would keep their eyes on the handler as they went in a direction and they'd know when to turn left or right or to stop or to stay or sit and crawl. They would learn all these commands and they'd be able to do it just with hand signals, because when you're out in the jungle looking for the enemy, you can't be talking and dogs can't be barking. You have to be so quiet. So that'd be at the front. And the amazing thing is that once they started putting scout dogs in the front of those patrols, none of them were ambushed. The dogs would always locate the Japanese before the Japanese could find the Americans, and that saved human lives. The other job in the 26 would have been the messenger dog. Messenger dogs would have been at the back of a patrol, and they have two handlers that they work with. One handler would go out on the patrol, and the other would stay back at the command post. So if there was a message, suppose the patrol located the Japanese, and the patrol leader wanted to get more orders about what to do next. Should we attack? Should we just note them on the map? Should we call in artillery? He would write whatever the message was on a piece of paper, roll it up, and it would go inside this collar. And then this collar would be strapped to the dog's neck. Maggie, come here. Maggie, come here. Good girl. This collar would go on the dog's neck. And the dog would be taken off the leash. A little bit trickier than I thought. And they've been told to go. Go. And at that point, good girl, at that point she would go and find her other handler and deliver the message. Now this was important in the jungle in World War II because radio communication was brand new and it wasn't practical to carry a phone with a cord everywhere you went. And the radio communication didn't work well because of the jungle, so they had to have a way to get messages back and forth. And again, these dogs could travel huge distances following their own trail. Like just think about when you take your dog on a walk and it's marking this territory. Think about how they could follow their own trail back to the command post, find their other handler, and deliver messages. And again, this freed up the men to do the fighting. And this saved the lives of men who would have to be on their own delivering messages. So dogs made a huge contribution to the war effort, all the way through. Now dogs, Maggie is a mutt. We don't really know what she is. But the Army was taking over 30 different types of dogs, some of them which would seem pretty strange today, like poodles, for example. That was in Great Danes. Those are dogs that they took. Today, mostly you see German Shepherds because they proved to be a really good war dog. Dogs in the Pacific had to be able to fight in hot conditions. They had to be trained to respond only really basically to praise. They didn't train the dogs with treats like we do because you didn't always know where your food was coming from. And a handler often had to share his own food with the dog to make sure that they had enough. Again, dog program was pretty new, so there wasn't a lot of specialized stuff going on. And so they really just brought in whatever they could. So this is just a quick story about how dogs made an impact in New Guinea. There's a dog right there. In New Guinea in the summer of 1944 with the 26. This is a true story. You can look up more about Bill Garbo in the 26. and there's lots of resources out there. I'll share some pictures that I have that Bill drew, and also pictures that he took of him and his dogs. And it's a pretty incredible story. Again, dogs weren't there to take human lives, they were there to save human lives. And they did it by doing what they do best, better than humans, their sense of smell and their sense of hearing. So thank you. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and we'll try to answer them.